Welcome to FarmCraft. I'm John, and this is the rest of the story behind the copper sign. I'm rushing through the beginning part right here because this all pretty much went as pictured. No hitches. But as usual, there's always hiccups and things when you're trying to do stuff like this. So here, things start to change a little bit. The first time I tried casting the sand, I used Pam to try to keep the sand from sticking. I had not put fillets on the pattern. In other words, I left the edges of all the letters perfectly vertical. I didn't slant them to make it easy for the sand to release. I thought I could get away with that if I tapped the pattern a lot and tapped it sideways to try to get the sand to release. So here I'm tapping, and this is my first attempt at making a sand negative of the pattern. And I tap it sideways, trying to get the sand to release. And it doesn't. I lose the A and the 8. Those smaller trapped areas are much more prone to the sand breakage, so I get rid of that and decide I'm going to have to make some fillets. So I rough up the areas that I'm going to be working on, get some Bondo auto body filler and mix it up here. And then I basically just fill those areas so that the edges are not vertical on the pattern, but they're slanted. I'm not showing the whole process, but you have to spend a fair amount of time smoothing, sanding once it's dry, and getting that pretty smooth. It looks really rough against the brown, but those are actually pretty smooth there before I paint it again. I start out with a coat of primer and then more paint. This time I'm using talcum powder instead of the Pam. I don't think the Pam really did any better. And there I got a perfect pattern. That's actually the only time I got a perfect pattern. And I did have to touch up. There were some loose areas, but just kind of press them back down with your fingers. Now I'm making the other side of the mold, which is just solid packed sand with a hole in it. The hole is the pour spout that I can pour into the void when it's sitting on top of the other side. According to my calculations, I had just enough volume in my crucible to fill that void. So I'm starting to fill my crucible. Now, I didn't show this in the original. I actually put some pewter in there. I made these little trinkets in my pewter casting video. You might want to check that out. I also show how to make green sand in that video. The reason for the pewter is because copper does much better casting if it has a little bit of an alloy. Pure copper is very difficult to cast. So by weight, I've got 1 to 2% of that is mostly tin pewter. So here I'm starting up my waste oil burner. And I've melted copper with this before. But it is very finicky. Sometimes I try to get it to work and it just won't work, and it wasn't cooperating today. Starting to heat up there, it's smoking a lot, there it's burning. But I just couldn't get it. Copper is hard to melt. Copper melts at 2,000 degrees, so you need a real efficient fire, and things need to be working just right to melt copper. Aluminum is much easier to deal with. I just couldn't get that to work today, so I ended up giving up on the waste oil and just going to my propane burner. There I'm preheating the draw spoon before I use it so I don't cool the metal. And scooping off some dross. And here's my first pour. I'm still not quite sure why this didn't work. I don't know if I needed to add flux. Maybe the metal just wasn't hot enough. But what happened was it started to fill the void, and then the metal cooled and quit flowing inside, so that the spout just filled up, and there I'm shaking my head. It won't take any more metal. So here I crack it open after it's cooled off, and you can see it did the A, and that was pretty much it. I didn't realize it until later. I just burned a hole in that tarp, letting that piece of hot metal fall down onto it. So if anybody knows why my pour didn't work, I would love to hear your comments. Was the metal not hot enough? Does copper just lose heat so quickly that it doesn't do well in a thin casting like this? Did I need to use flux? Love to hear what went wrong there. And there's the pour spout. I actually took that spout and turned it down on the lathe. I show that later in the video. So here I'm trying again. At this point I have a plan of just pouring it into the open mold like I do in the final version of the video. And for the first time when I go to pick the pattern up, to pick the mold up, the pattern doesn't stay with it. I don't know why. So I do it again, and it doesn't stay with it again. That was a little frustrating. So I put a piece of plywood on the back of it and did it again. It looks quick in the video, but packing all that sand does take some time, and doing it over and over and over gets kind of old. So I pull it out, and the sand actually broke around the end. And this is the mold that I actually use in the final sign. And you can see it. I'll point it out later. Here you can see the ends broken there. So there I pour the metal in, and I kind of figured I wasn't going to have enough because I knew it's not constrained to a void by having the other sand mold on top. It allowed to get thicker the way I was pouring it here. But copper is really kind of a neat metal. It's the main ingredient of brass, which is what's used in brazing rods, and it's very sticky when it's molten. So at this point my plan was to clean this up, make another mold, put this back in the mold, melt some additional copper, and just pour the rest to fill out the areas that I ran short on copper. And that would have worked just fine. For a sign, and with how sticky copper is, it would have been just as solid as this piece here is. But then once I cleaned it up and took a look at it, showed it to my wife, and she really liked it, we decided to just go with it like it was. There you can see the part of the N where the sand broke. So I took the A from that failed casting, and I actually sprayed it with a mixture of ammonia and salt solution to try to make it green quickly. And I might still do that to the main sign. I haven't decided yet. Kind of gives it a neat look. And then I also took the piece in that pouring that was in the tube. So in the top mold, when the molten copper was going down the tube, and then basically it was like that. And I cut that off and put it in the lathe just to see how it looked, and it's got some voids in it, but actually a decent piece of copper. So if I hadn't put that tin in there, this would be full of holes and much rougher than it is. I don't have any to show you, but I tried just some straight 100% copper, and it was a disaster, really. It was kind of worthless to do. And then did some research and discovered that pure copper is really hard to work with, but just a tiny bit of an alloy makes a huge difference. So this is like 1 to 2% tin by weight. Makes a big difference. That's why they always used to mix copper with lead, because that gives it even more forgiving properties. And there you go. That's the rest of the story behind the copper sign. Now I have to paint that signpost. It's always something. I want to thank the folks who are supporting me on Patreon. It's really appreciated. And come check me out on Facebook and Twitter too. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time.